What I wondered when I read that was whether or not Comrade Aronovich took that to its logical conclusion in the way that we have seen some members of the Communist Party do recently. And of course I'm referring to Comrades Purdy and Pryor, and comrades can read this in Socialist Challenge this week, for these comrades have, in a way that's not dissimilar to Communist Party leaders in other countries in Europe, have taken and developed a novel idea for socialists. That is, they put forward the idea that what we should have is a socialist social contract. What they describe by this and what they see as being an important step forward with this concept is that you have a situation where the trade unions can negotiate collectively and directly with the government, and therefore what that allows one to do is to overcome the great obstacle of sectoral bargaining. But another point that I wanted to raise, which is particularly important at tonight's debate, I think, in the wake of the TUC, is the statement that Comrade Aronovich makes in his contribution, which goes as follows, that as the struggle develops, some who were counted as left will on some issues appear to the right. We are not tied to personalities, he promises, but to action on issues and programs. Unfortunately, the strategy provided by the Communist Party does not live up in this. It doesn't live up to this promise in terms of both the policies it puts forward and in terms of the day-to-day practice of the Communist Party in the class struggle. I think that when many Communist Party members, rank-and-file militants in the Communist Party, picked up their copy of Morning Star this week, they must have thought that perhaps they'd got the wrong paper. Because what did we see in the Morning Star? We saw in a headline that Scanlon was now issuing edicts was the word that was used, on the 12-month rule. Now, of course, this headline has to be seen in the context of past articles in the past years where Scanlon is mentioned. What we have seen is praises of Scanlon, or at best what we've seen is statements that he's a left who has made mistakes, he is a left that needs to be subject to some kind of fraternal criticism, I think is the way that Comrade Pierce put it. To date, we've seen no explanation for this distancing of the Communist Party from Scanlon, and therefore I think that we can only assume, which is in contradiction to what Comrade Aronovich at least hopes, that in fact the Communist Party sees this simply as another betrayal of one man. Because if it was actually these sharp policies and the program which Comrade Aronovich is concerned with, I think what we would see is a mapping out of a strategy of how now to begin to confront the 12-month rule. What we would see is a campaign launched by Communist Party militants against candidates in the AUEW election, which are fighting for nothing more than an uncritical continuation of the policies put forward by Scanlon. We've seen neither of those in the pages of the Morning Star. If the Communist Party did come up with concrete alternative policies which would take the working class forward, what forces would carry out these policies, and how would the Communist Party see organizing these forces? To answer this, what we have to look at is the system of alliances in the trade unions which the Communist Party proposes in its efforts to develop and weld some form of left unity. And this system of alliances is based for the Communist Party on one crucial relationship. That is the relationship between the Communist Party and the Scanlons and worse of the trade union movement. What this entails is nothing other than a systematic subordination of the interests of the class struggle to one factor, and that is what is acceptable to the lefts in the trade union leadership. And it also entails a failure to recognize that the masses themselves are the decisive force in overthrowing the capitalist system, and that will be achieved through the independent organization of the working class and the political expression of the forms of organization that the working class adopts will not be, as Comrade Mandel has already pointed out, reduced or confined to the parliamentary arena. We've got many examples in Britain in looking at the failure of the Communist Party to confront the so-called left leaders within the trade unions. Let's just take the LCDTU, a CP-inspired body. In the face of the Industrial Relations Bill, this body, in December of 1970, called out almost 1 million workers on strike. Early the next year, over 1 million workers were called out on strike. But what happened several months later? The AUEW, under the leadership of Scanlon, called a national strike. From that point forward, comrades, where was the LCDTU? The LCDTU has been put into hibernation. To put it crudely, there was no need to mobilize the working class to pressurize the left trade union leadership when the bureaucracy itself had moved. And what do we see at the LCDTU today? The LCDTU exists in name only, or at best, an organization of the base of the Communist Party within the trade unions. Where has the LCDTU been to organize a force within the left of the trade union movement that could actually provide the precondition so that Scanlon would not be in a position of putting forward his so-called edict on the 12-month rule? Just not so as we don't get into a false debate on this question, though, I think that what we have to say is that from the point of view of the IMG, we see no problems whatsoever in involving people like Scanlon in LCDTU-type bodies. But what we must ensure as revolutionaries is that any orientation to the trade union leadership, to the trade union bureaucracy, must be based on the premise that we want to politically win militants in the base, the followers of these leaders, to revolutionary politics and to a program and policies to take the class struggle forward. I think another example, a more recent example, where the CP has failed to see the necessity for the independent organization of the working class, was in the tool room strike earlier this year. Comrades will remember this strike. It was the first break in the passivity of the core section of the working class. It was a clear challenge to the class collaboration of the social contract. It took place in a situation where there was rising unemployment, where we have increased inflation, attack on democratic rights, and where the fight back at that stage was of partial struggles of mainly the weaker sections of the working class. Everyone recognized that the Leyland strike was a challenge to the Labour government, to the anti-working class policies of the Labour government. The bosses certainly recognized it. Leyland management recognized it, the press recognized it, and the trade unions themselves recognized it. And in the face of this, the tool room workers had to confront a situation where 21 unions within Leyland, the leadership of those unions, instructed the workers to go back to work, put out an appeal to go back to work. What should have been the attitude of revolutionaries in this situation? Well, in the pages of Red Weekly, the arguments were put forward that however inadequate the basis of that struggle, whatever kind of sectoralism marked that struggle, what was necessary was to broaden the struggle, to extend the struggle, and to break down the isolation. What did we see in the Morning Star? And I quote from the March 16th issue. "The continuation of the strike can lead only to further divisions between one section of workers and another at British Leyland." That was the policy and the strategy put forward by the Morning Star, which was nothing other than a capitulation, in fact, to the line that was being offered by Scanlon. I think that this issue is particularly important, the question of the trade union alliance, because what the Communist Party does in this country is to use that as the linchpin of its whole system of alliances which it hopes to build. That whole system of alliances is a mirror of that. And what the Communist Party argues is that the broad democratic alliance, which includes sections of the women's movement, the black movement, the working class, and even sections of the capitalist class, as well as intermediary strata, what that is nothing other than a continuation of the trade union strategy that is offered for left unity within the unions. What it is in the unions is a subordination of the interests of the working class to the bureaucracy, and what it is in the broad democratic alliance is little more than the interests of the working class movement as a whole, including the women's movement, the national movements, etc., to the interests of even sections of the capitalist class.